I'm a big believer in a big heart, a kind soul. So that was my biggest prayer. Lord, please let both my boys have kind souls. Let them have a big heart. Troy loved family. He loved the holidays. He especially loved Christmas because everyone was happy, and Troy was always happy. He didn't like seeing anyone sad. He was just look, he is an old soul. He didn't grow up around any sorts of abuse of any drug. He didn't grow up anything like that, but Troy always had a heart and would always reach out to people that had different problems, whether it was, his heart was huge, just like I had prayed for, and I got my wish when they were in elementary school. I went back to school and got my degree in counseling. They saw the disease of addiction, but they never lived it. He was pretty smart. He did well in school. I wanted him to stay around for the first year because I didn't think he was mature enough to go off anywhere. I wanted him to stay at Bland, then transfer to wherever he wanted. Well, things changed his senior year. His accident was the day after his HHS. He was at the tennis courts, told him to be in the house by 8:30. He went with the guys to play tennis because he played on the tennis team. Called me about 8:30 and said, "Mom, the girls just showed up. Can we just stay a little bit longer?" I was getting ready for bed, and I said, "Okay, 9 o'clock, you be in this door at 9:10. It was 10 minutes from the house where he was. He was at a park. The boys and girls were playing tennis. The girls decided to leave. 3 boys jump on the back of the car. 2 boys jump on the front. Troy was one on the front. She starts speeding up to go over a speed bump, slows down. The boys on the back jump off. She goes over another speed bump, and then another boy in the front, Derek, jumps off. Well, Troy's still on it, and he has like a sweatsuit on, and he's sliding. He tries to jump, but goes up under the car. She doesn't realize it. She speeds up, goes over him, and they're screaming at her to stop. And then they look under the car, and Troy's pinned, he can't breathe, and they told her she has to, because they couldn't lift it up, she has to back up. When she backed up, the tailpipe went into his hip and was stuck. Then they had to actually physically lift the car up, slide him out, and that's when 10 minutes later the phone rings and I see it's Derek, one of the boys that's with Troy, and he's yelling at me, "Meet us at the hospital, meet us at the hospital. Troy has been run over by a car." We fly there, run into the emergency room, and they had never heard anything. They had never heard. There was no Troy Howlett, and of course, I'm thinking, if that Derek has played a trick on me, oh my gosh, I just had a heart attack. Someone picked up Troy's phone, it's a police officer, and he's saying, "You're his mom, can you meet us at a field? Troy's being med flighted to MCV. Of course, that was just the worst thing that could ever happen. I made it right before the helicopter, and I went to the helicopter door, and Troy's laying there. He had been scalped from the tip of his head all the way down the back side of his body. He's just looking at me almost in shock. They had cut his clothes off, and he had a hole in his hip where the tailpipe had gone in there, and they were sucking out the rocks. And they told me I had to get off there. They were taking an MCV, and I remember going over the bridge to Richmond. At the same time, that helicopter was landing, and I lost it at this point. Now I'm hysterically. I realize that's my baby in that helicopter. They were holding Troy down, and he's screaming my name, "Help me, Mom, help me, Mom." And of course, I'm crying and trying to talk to him. The doctor looks at me and points at me and says, "Get her out of here." And then they wouldn't let me in there. I guess I was crying harder than, or making Troy too upset, I don't know. But they made me wait in the waiting room with everyone. And I remember just sitting there, and I look up, and the young lady that ran over him and her parents came in this room. Now the room started, this is at MCV, it was a huge waiting room. At this point, there were about 200 people from Hopewell. After everything's said and done, they had him up in a room, and I'm sitting in the chair wrapped up, and all of a sudden I hear my son say, "Mom," because he's waking up now. And I look up, and he said, I don't want to start crying, but he said, "I'm so sorry." And he's crying, then I start crying, and I said, "What are you sorry for?" He said, I'm sorry. I should have come home at 8:30, and I thought, we're worried about that now? But he was just, again, this big heart. He was scared. He didn't want to hurt my feelings. He had done all this, and all these people were there, and And I guess he didn't feel any pain at this time, but it was a pitiful night. It was a pitiful night. He just felt horrible. He was in there for a few days, but we had to go back and forth so many times to Richmond, and then they scheduled for a skin graft. His hair grew back fine. He was handsome as ever. He was on his way back to recovery. I never had a thought about addiction, and it's so ironic. Here I was, a counselor with the court systems, and you would think I would know better. Addiction never crossed my mind. Boy, if I could change that. I mean, I would have never, ever. I would have gladly seen him suffer versus taking a pain pill. That started 12 years of pure hell. And I remember it like yesterday. I was in the living room, and he comes home from school, from his classes, and I'm doing something by the fireplace. I mean, I can remember the exact moment it happened. He stayed downstairs in like a big area. I hear him coming up the stairs, and usually he goes straight to the kitchen looking for food, but he came to me and he said, "Mama, I need your help." And I'm not looking at him, doing something, and he was just standing there. So I turned around and I could see something in his eyes. I stood up and I said, "What? What's wrong?" At this point, I'm thinking, he's just got a speeding ticket, something's happened. And then I see his eyes kind of swell up, and I just knew something was wrong. Either a girl broke up with him, something was gonna happen. And he said, "I'm addicted to pain pills and I can't get off and I need your help." And it just sat there, and I'm just looking at him like, he hasn't taken a pain pill in like 5 months, and I said, "What are you talking about? You haven't been prescribed pain pills. It's been almost a year, 6 months, 7 months." He said, No, Mom, when they cut me off, I thought it was over." He said, "And I didn't want to tell you that I still needed them, so I've been buying them on the street." And he said, "And I've been trying to get off." And he said, I can't stop." Still in my head, I'm thinking, okay, we're gonna go to the doctor, we're gonna get it fixed, and it's gonna be okay. Not understanding what actually addiction was. I'd never been around addiction like that. I had no earthly idea. I had no clue to what was getting ready to happen to him and to the family. Had no idea. We went to a doctor, and he wanted to put Troy on Suboxone, but take him down from Suboxone. And I learned a little bit about it, bits and pieces, and sure enough, 12 days, my son was free and clear, taking off this, and nothing else was ever said, like, go to counseling, do this, but he was clean, and he started feeling normal again. 6 months later, we're doing it again. And this went on for years. But the reason he didn't tell me it didn't work is because he said he didn't want to let me down. I can tell you about every rehab there is, from the good, the bad, the ugly. And it just seemed it was never working. His whole chemistry in his brain had changed during that year. And the reason it never healed was because he continued every few months doing it. And as time went on, the more I learned about addiction and how people really cannot stop just because you say stop. It was a vicious, vicious cycle. And I remember at my niece's wedding, my family now knows nothing, because here I am thinking I'm strong and I'm invincible and I can do anything, and I didn't want my family knowing. I was ashamed, I was embarrassed. I couldn't fix this problem my son had. I just didn't tell a whole lot of people. Didn't even really tell his dad a whole lot of stuff, because all he would do is put me down. I did something wrong, or I don't even know. I was ashamed. And I wanted to fix my son. And at the wedding, and this is when my family really kind of got involved. At the wedding, beautiful, gorgeous wedding at my sister's farm, and next thing I know, somebody's yelling, "Troy's having a seizure." And so I turn around, he's having a seizure, and I have a sister-in-law that's a doctor, and she's trying to explain to me what a seizure is. What they don't know, he's probably already had 24 seizures, and I'm just listening, I'm trying to get Troy in the car. Okay. And they kept looking at me like, why isn't she listening? I already knew. I knew what was doing. I wanted to get out of there, because I wanted to, I don't want to ruin my niece's wedding. And everybody's trying to explain to me, "Donna, he needs, you need to go find out why he's having these seizures." They had no idea. And I'd tell them bits and pieces, but their thing was the same thing that I did when I first happened. Just make them stop. Just be with them 24/7. It doesn't work that way. I've tried every way you can think of. Give me another way. Somebody tell me something. I was fighting this. Then he'd start having accidents. and he'd be in trouble by the police. He was on probation. They would find pills that he was taking personally for himself. So whenever he was on probation, it was for something that he did, a wreck, and his own personal pills. It was not, he wasn't a dealer or anything. He was just buying to satisfy what he needed. He had been clean, he had probation, and his buddies came home from school or something, or somewhere. They all came in town, they had a party, he went. He had been clean several months. He looked amazing. I mean, I'm telling you, he looked the best, and I knew he'd finally beat that demon. What had happened was, at this party, Troy had, I guess, somebody had something. He didn't take it there. He goes to a community mart. His car is off, his car's not running. He goes in, I guess, and gets a drink. I guess he sits down and realizes, and he does this drug. I don't know what drug it was, but he passed out behind the wheel. Of course, the car wasn't running. The keys were on the seat, but I guess the store owner must have called the police. The police were tapping on the window, and evidently what he had taken must have been really bad because they Narcaned him. All of a sudden, I get a call from him at the hospital, and he said, "Mom, I'm at the hospital, you need to come up here." It was almost, I had major PTSD, and I walked in, and they said, "Ma'am, you can't come in here," and I said, "Oh, that you don't know me." I didn't even look at him. I went over to Troy, asked if he was okay, and asked him what happened. He told me exactly what he did. He said, "I'm so sorry." He said, I was so tempted. Somebody gave it to me at this party. He said, "I wasn't driving, Mom, I wasn't driving." And anyway, they asked me to leave again. I said, "I'm not leaving." So Troy had to give him permission for me to stay. And they're telling my son, because he's on probation, that he's going to do some stuff for them. Of course, before Troy could even speak, and I said, "No, ma'am. No, he won't, because my son's not strong enough. Y'all, please don't do this to my son." And they said, "We're not talking to you, ma'am, and you're interfering, and I'm going to ask you one more time not to talk." They telling Troy, "If you don't do this, we're going to wait for the doctors to release you, taking you straight to jail, and you'll sit out your time until you go to court," which was like 3 months away. He's looking at me, "Mom, please, Mom, please." And I said, "Son, they're going to set you up." I said, "Do you know what you're going to be doing? You're not strong enough." He said, "Mom, I'll have to be strong enough." I said, "You weren't strong enough last night at a party." I said, what do you mean?" And anyway, he did it. And he started, he didn't want to do it. He was ashamed. And he knew these guys. They told me how to do it twice. After the 4th time, he finally says, "I'm not doing this anymore." And they said, "Oh, yes, you are." Then he told them he was really worried that the person they were buying from knew he was an informant, and he was scared for his life at this point. He didn't want to do this anymore. He wanted to stop. How many more times? The last time he did was the last time Troy bought. What he skimmed off the top, it killed him instantly, and he died. We had no idea what he had died from, but the doctor thought he had died from a brain aneurysm, maybe a massive heart attack, from maybe past drug use, because overall he was pretty healthy. So that's what we thought it was. We're at the funeral, and I just wanted it to be perfect. This is the last time. I wasn't there when he died. I wasn't there when they took him away. I wanted this to be so perfect. Everybody was sitting down. It was standing room only. I was so proud there were so many people there. And even I worked for the courts. All these police were here. And I thought they were there. I thought, you know what? Way to go, Hopewell. You know, they're there, honoring my son. I was so proud, and it was so packed, and I just knew my son was smiling. He was sitting right there, and I'm watching. I'm devastated. Preacher's talking, and all of a sudden the preacher turns white as a ghost, and I'm looking at him, and the whole place turns around. They were arresting his best friend. They had opened the doors in the back, and they came in. They arrested his best friend for some petty charge or something. As devastating as that was, I could not focus on it. I had to keep focused here. And I wish I had had the willpower to stand up and do something then, but I couldn't. I was watching my son in the casket, and I wanted it to go perfect, so they took him. And I thought, that's just horrible taste, but we'll deal with that later. And I'm just dealing with it. And then at the end of the funeral, everybody stands up, and all the family is up front, and it takes forever, all these family members. Next thing you know, the back door's open, and there's a guy, police officer in tactical gear, escorting the boy they had taken 40 minutes earlier. Now they've shackled his feet in handcuffs, and they're escorting him down the aisle. I thought they had taken him to jail, but now they want to put a little bit more on it, and they escort him. It ruined. It's not like I can do a do-over on a funeral, and it ruined the funeral. And the only thing, talk about PTSD, I had that already with the horrific 13 years of my son's addiction, but now the only thing I'm going to remember of my son's funeral is this boy walking down the aisle with shackles. And I really just wanted an apology. Still haven't gotten one today. It wasn't until after he had passed that I found this journal that he had written in, and it took me almost 2 years to read that journal, because just reading the pages, I'd lose it after the first or second page, but every day he prayed to God to take this addiction away. And ultimately my son is with the Lord and his addiction is gone. The first year was just a blur. I'm telling you, I was just waking up, living, going to bed. Anything could have happened. It could have been a tornado come through here and I wouldn't move. I was just surviving. But after my son died, I started getting people back people were calling me and talking about Troy, and they needed help, and can you help me? And Troy had done this, and Troy had done that, and can I come talk to you? I felt better when I talked to Troy, and I realized Troy was out there doing some ministry that I knew nothing about. And he was just an incredible, I thought, man, that's my son. What an incredible kid he was. But I found out so much stuff, so I thought, okay, God, I'll start helping people, and it started again. So I started helping people, but the more I helped, the more I learned about my son, because they would always tell me, well, Troy did this, Troy showed me so much kindness, I knew he was right if I talked to you. And I had all these people reaching out. I have so many emails of people telling me the things that Troy had done that I had no idea. He helped more people by dying than he would actually being here, because it had much more of an impact, because they saw he was full of grace. When you lose a child, what you don't want is anyone to forget him. And people are scared to bring up the name because you're going to start crying. Well, when you do cry, it's because someone did bring up the name. You're like, oh my God, you didn't forget him? You remember my son? You want someone to say, you know what, I remember when Troy did that, or he was such a good kid. It makes you feel like, I want my son remembered. Not only because he was such a cool kid, because he really was a cool kid. He was like a little man walking around in a kid's body. But he was so kind and his heart was so big. And then as I look back on what he did and what he was doing for people, I want people to know who he really was. But more importantly, I want them to know what addiction is like, how it can begin. And it can be, Troy started writing a book, and the name of the book was This Could Happen to Anyone. And I'm telling you, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, doesn't matter where you come from, it can happen. Whether you're born into addiction, or whether you have an accident, or whether you just try it for the first time, it doesn't matter. But once you do and the grips of addiction get a hold of you, people think that you can't get out of it. So I want it to be for a film for everyone, not just someone that's in addiction. I want it to be for the moms and dads and brothers and sisters. I want it to be for someone that bashes people that are in addiction, so they will understand that it's not like that. They can't just stop. But most importantly, I want them to understand that there's hope. And I want them to understand that you can get help. And maybe it took my son's life to learn that, but I can tell you this, the one thing that was steady through all of this, the one thing that I know for a fact that helped my son was God. And that's what I want people to know. You can't just go to a rehab. You have to have God in the picture.